The gentleman to my immediate left, you all know is a Hall of Famer, but if you are aware of the story at all, everyone up here, everyone, all four of them are Hall of Famers. And for the Reulands, we welcome you to Minnesota for the very first time.
Thank you.
I think everyone is aware of the story, but Rod, for a little background, if you would, one more time. Take us back to your whimsical journey to a golf course just to get a practice round in September of a couple years ago.
Well, last September, we had a walk at Angel Stadium, and it was a walk about the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, something which I've done, I think, the last 8 or 9 years. And we had close to 10,000 people that came out and walked that night. And I walked a little bit, and then I got up on the stand with my buddy who has a band, and I was singing and dancing around with him, having fun.
Is there any video of that, by the way? We'd like to get video of that.
Yeah, I understand he didn't know the lyrics to the song.
And it's a very popular song, so I don't know where I went wrong, you know. And the next morning I got up, and I got up about 5 o'clock and decided to go out and hit some golf balls and get some practice. And, you know, I felt good. And I went out to this course that, just a small course, and I played there before and got to know the people well. And I like going back there because the guy's wife made such great lemonade that whenever I went in there, I always asked her if she'd made it in lemonade today. And she always gave me a big glass of it. Anyways, this to me was just going to be a practice run. And the clubhouse is not too far from hole number 1. And I pulled my cart up to hole number 1. I got out, took about 6 or 7 balls to put in my pocket just in case, you know, my drives would be all over the place. But the first ball I hit went down the middle, so I said, oh, I'm good. I don't need another shot. And as I'm going back to put my clubs and my driver in my bag back to the cart, all of a sudden I felt like I had a burn in my chest. And my hands started getting clammy. And the first thing that came to my mind is my buddy, a couple of weeks earlier, was in Las Vegas, and he was playing the tables, and he was winning, and he felt something different in his chest. And so he grabbed his money, went up to the hotel doctor, and they told him that he was having some problems with his heart, and that the doctor told him he wanted him to go to the emergency room and get checked out. And then he did that, decided that they were going to head back home instead of staying in Las Vegas. And when he got home and he went to see his cardiologist, he was having, I think he had 3, yeah, he had 3 stents. And so he had some work done. And I remembered that because I had never felt anything. People had always told me that, you know, you'll feel something, you know, different about, you know, if you're having a heart attack. I never felt anything at all. I felt like, you know, I was healthy. But this thing just raised his right hand and hit me upside the head. And, you know, it's a good thing I was on hole 1, because if I was on hole 1, wasn't on hole 1, I wouldn't be here today. So my cart didn't have too far to go, and I walked in, and there was just one lady there, and I think a 13 or 14-year-old kid. And I says, would you please call the paramedics? And the next thing I heard, the kid saying, did you hear what he said? Please call the paramedics. So she went ahead and called the paramedics, and she called her husband, I think at first, because he is a paramedic. And they talked about me, and he asked her different questions about what my hands look like and my lips and stuff like that. And she says, well, his lips look kissable. And, no. But he told her, I think he's having a heart attack. He says, call the paramedics. Well, I did, and they're on their way. After that, I guess he told her to lay me down and prop my legs up. And so as I'm laying on the floor, I had my leg propped up on a chair. And the next thing I knew is I opened my eyes, the paramedics were there, and there's one of them with electrical zappers getting ready to zap me. So I'm thinking to myself, why is he doing that? And then he's yelling to the other three guys, let's go, goddammit, let's go. We're losing him, let's go. And then I flatlined. And they brought me back. And I guess as they're loading me onto the ambulance, I flatlined again. And when I got to the hospital, they were going to take me to the operating room. I flatlined again. And I couldn't understand really what was going on. The only thing that I could think about at that time is, I don't think he wants me. I'm not good enough to be up there with him. And then I thought, oh, maybe he wants to keep me here on Earth to continue doing the job that he put in front of me, which was to help kids that had leukemia, and I was supposed to be a voice to get people to join the National Marrow Donor Program to get marrows for these different kids, because that's what I've been doing the last 22 years, and having a golf tournament for the last 22 years for PCRF. And after that, I don't know what happened, but it just seems like I was gone. I went through the LVAD, honey. You want to talk about that, please?
The first hospital he was taken to was close to where he was golfing, which was like an hour from our home. And the paramedics wanted to know which hospital I wanted him to go to. And that's when I first learned that he had been golfing in Corona, which is far. And so I told them, take him to the best hospital for whatever this is going on, which is what they did. And then the hospital called me, and they told me he was stable, he was lucid, he'd given them my phone number, and that's how they were able to call me. And so to take my time, drive out there, and they put me in a waiting room down where the cath lab is, and the doctor came in eventually and told me that I would be able to go in to see him before they transferred him to ICU. And I thought, ICU didn't sound right to me, because if he was stable, he was lucid and needed stents, I thought, maybe stay overnight just to be sure everything's okay, but I didn't think that would include the ICU. And so I asked whether or not he could be transferred, because there's a hospital 10 minutes from our home, which would, of course, be a lot more convenient. And our doctors are around that area. And they said, no, he's too sick to be transferred. So that was kind of my first inkling that there was something else going on. Unfortunately, that hospital released him, discharged him a week later. They released him and told him 2 weeks of light activity, and then 2 weeks And after the 2 weeks, no restrictions. We had a trip to Italy planned for the end of October. Yes, go on that trip. Don't waste a day, you never know. And, but once you get him home, this was a Sunday, tomorrow, call a local cardiologist and, in those first 2 weeks, get him in to see a cardiologist who will take over his care. So I called on Monday, and I just took the first appointment available, which was Wednesday. And when we went to see the cardiologist, when you walked into the room, took him 2 seconds before he said, "I really don't like what I'm seeing here, and I think that he needs to go across the parking lot to Mission Hospital's ER and get checked out, just to make sure." And I was absolutely stunned because he had just been discharged with 2 weeks of light activity and then no restrictions, and yes, go to Italy. So we went over what they called it was a tune-up, just to make sure. They admitted him to Mission Hospital, and 2 days later, our cardiologist came in and said, he really should have turned a corner by now. And I think that he needs extreme heart failure care, which we don't provide here. In fact, there isn't a hospital in Orange County that does. So we would like to have him transferred either to Scripps in San Diego or SC in LA. And I chose Scripps. San Diego, a little easier drive than Los Angeles. That was he was admitted to Mission Hospital on September 30th. Once he got to Scripps, they diagnosed him as needing both an LVAD and a heart transplant. And he needed the LVAD right away. So 2 days later, he had the LVAD pump implanted and was not out of the hospital until November 5th. So it was a journey I wasn't prepared for. I learned at that time that I didn't know anything really about heart attacks, heart failure, cardiac arrest. And I believed that first hospital because they were a heart institute. And I thought that they knew what they were doing. And obviously they did something wrong. And so I took it upon myself from that point forward to learn everything and anything that I could so that anything like that would not happen again.
Let's bring the Reulands into this. At this point, you were oblivious to what his situation was. You were aware of him because of an earlier contact Conrad had with Rod at school when he was, 12 years old?
11 or 12. Mm-hmm.
Relate that story.
So Conrad went to the same grade school as Rod's kids, Cheyenne and Devin, and all my boys went there too. And one day and it was about a 20-minute, half an hour drive for us. So I had to pick him up every day. And so one day he gets in the car and he's about 11 or 12 and his eyes are real big and he's all excited and he says, "I met Rod Carew today. Mommy, Mom, I met Rod Carew today." The whole way home, half an hour drive, however long, I heard about him meeting Rod Carew over and over, and he talked to me, and he's a pro athlete, and I want to be a pro athlete. I mean, so he was so excited. Sitting around the dinner table, we would change the subject, and somebody would want to talk about their day, and he'd go, "Yeah, but did you meet Rod Carew today? Because I met Rod Carew today." So he was smitten. He was, it was a highlight of his life for sure. Yeah, because he had always wanted to be some type of a pro athlete, and we thought it would be basketball because he never played football until he entered high school, and it turned out he had a love of football, so that's where it went.
And you got to the National Football League, played for a couple of teams in the National Football League. Rod, let's check back with you now. You had the LVAD machine, and I know you made visits, at least one visit to Minnesota with the device, but either you or Rhonda, things turned or deteriorated over the course of time to the point where there was some urgent need for a transplant, right? Things needed to be accelerated faster than maybe anyone thought at the time.
True. The LVAD has really only been around for maybe 13 years, and the main reason it was developed was a bridge to a transplant. So if somebody needed a transplant, they would oftentimes receive the LVAD first to continue to help the heart move blood through your body and essentially squeeze. And then the plan was, you would then get the heart transplant. But they had learned over those 13 years that actually people might, they could actually live with it if they weren't candidates for heart transplants. So it had, turned out to be actually a great thing to help heart failure patients. But the current downside to an LVAD is your heart beats, so it squeezes, pause. The LVAD, the pump, continually spins, which means the blood is continually flowing. And what that can do, and it's in about 40% of LVAD patients, it can cause capillaries, very small capillaries, to overload the blood and start to leak. And most of the time, they happen in your gastrointestinal system. They can tell through multiple different symptoms. But Rod had, he'd been fine with the LVAD up until it was May of last year, and he had a gastro bleed. And then in June, he had 2, fairly close together. And then we came to Minnesota in July, and also went to Cooperstown. When we returned from Cooperstown, things weren't quite right with Rod. Thought he had another gastro bleed, so doctors said bring him down, and we did, but his hemoglobin number was fine. It was high. So they weren't sure exactly what was going on, so they decided to keep him in the hospital and do some tests, etc. And in the middle of the night, a couple of nights later, Rod just literally went off the rails. I mean, he was yelling and screaming, and he made no sense. He couldn't pick up this bottle of water. He'd be over here, and they did an emergency CAT scan and learned that this time the LVAD bleed was on his brain. So he had a blood clot on each side of his brain, and a neurosurgeon was brought in to do emergency surgery to drain the clots. Now, that was caused once again by blood thinners, and all those gastro bleeds and this bleed is a result of thin blood. And they need the thin blood to stop clots from forming that could then interrupt the LVAD's pumping flow. And so he was in the hospital for 6 weeks after that with the brain bleed. And it was from that point forward that it was essentially over my dead body would he ever be on another blood thinner, because he was never going to get a heart transplant, and the LVAD was not working for him. So they took him off the blood thinners, and the day after we got home from the 6 weeks, the Cedars-Sinai called and wanted to set up the heart evaluation meeting with us to evaluate him for the heart transplant, which was music to my ears, because I wasn't sure after something like that how they would look at him as a candidate for a heart transplant.
Long about the time then that the LVAD side effects were starting to arise with Rod, Conrad, did he do this on his own? Did he consult you, Mary, or Ralph? He had to get his driver's license renewed, I guess. And did he discuss this with you, the option of being a donor, organ donor or not? Or how did he come to that conclusion?
Well, I'll take this because I was there. He was with the Baltimore Ravens, and I had sent his renewal form out to Baltimore for him to renew his driver's license. And when he got home, and it was right around his birthday in April, his birthday was April 4th, he sat down and he was home and he was looking through his mail, and if you knew Conrad, this would just be par for the course. He didn't send that in. So it was going to be late. This is just, and he says, oh, Mom, I forgot to send in my driver's license thing to renew it. And I said, Conrad, you gotta send that in. You gotta get that done. So he sat down, right? It was just he and I home. I was cooking dinner and he was sitting in my kitchen. And so he did it right then and there. He was filling it out and he gets to the page that asks about organ donation. And he says, Mom, they're asking if I should be an organ donor. What do you think? And I go, well, honey, that's a completely personal decision. I can't tell you what to do. That's got to come from your heart, and you have to feel what you want to do with it. And so he paused for a second, and he says, well, Mom, are you one? And I said, well, yeah, I'm one. I've always been one, and I just figure if I can't use my organs anymore and they can save somebody's life or help them, why not? So he looked at me, and he goes, I'm going to do it. And he checked the box, and I remember thinking, gee, I hope it doesn't come to that. Checked the box, put it in the mail, and we didn't think about it anymore until the dreadful time that he was in the hospital, and that's when it was brought back up to us. And I was the only one in the family at the time. They came in and said, your son was an organ donor, and nobody else knew because we didn't talk about it anymore. And I remembered that day vividly. I said, yes, I know he's an organ donor. And 7 months later, this is what happened after he checked that box.
Ralph, talk about what happened to Conrad, how you were made aware of it. You're in the medical field, so you were aware immediately, I guess, that this was a pretty grave situation.
Yeah, it was Saturday evening, a couple of days after Thanksgiving, and he was going to come over later that night to hang with his brothers, and he was getting a workout in, kind of a light lift, he called it, and then he was going to do some treadmill work, and then he was going to come over. And so he called, thinking that maybe we were already asleep, we were watching a movie kind of late, and so he called his brother, who's in medical school, and he said, hey, got on the treadmill and I felt this click, and then I've got this headache behind my left eye, and say, what do you think? What do you think's going on? He said, well, I don't know for sure. Let me get Dad. So he gave me the phone. He told me that same story, and I told him, well, you're probably okay since you're talking and everything seems to be okay otherwise, but I'm a little concerned that you could have something else going on there, like an aneurysm, but I don't think so, but we need to check it out. So I told him to get over to the hospital and get that evaluated. He fought me on that, say, it's really not that bad. I don't think I really need to do that. And so I convinced him that, no, you need to go. So he did, and we got there shortly after he did. They had already done the scan, and sure enough, he had a brain aneurysm, our worst fear. And it was a bad type of aneurysm in the worst spot you could have it. So it wasn't just an easy coil it, clip it, and you should be okay. It was much more involved. So it was decided that because it was such a problem that he be transferred to a tertiary center where they had more experience with this sort of lesion. And so he's transferred to UCLA Medical Center, and there they were conferring with experts all over the world, and they're experts there at UCLA trying to decide the best way to approach it, and thought they would wait about a week before they would go and do the procedure. And 4 days after the initial headache, unfortunately, the aneurysm ruptured. And so he went in for emergency surgery for, anyway, I can't remember how many hours, but 13 to 17 hours, somewhere in there. And they had to go in and do what they could, and he was in a coma for the next few days, at least 10 more days. And then he was declared brain dead and passed away on December the 12th
At age 29.
at age 29.
Rhonda, now things were getting to be a kind of a critical juncture for you and Rod too, because he was deteriorating, and as I understand it, you were a regular persistent voice on the phone trying to figure out where Rod was on the list.
Yes, I'm pretty sure that I'm the only person Cedars has ever called to say your husband has been, is on the list for both the heart and the kidney. And I asked which classification, and they said 1B. And I said, 1B? He shouldn't be a 1B. He should be a 1AE, which is higher on the list because of the risk factors. The risk factors were his age, the fact he wasn't on blood thinners, which could cause him to throw a clot that would possibly stop the pump. Plus, I had learned a few months earlier, but didn't share this with Rod, that his right heart was failing, and the LVAD only supports the left side of the heart. So if the right heart fails, then I'm not sure all that they can do to continue waiting for a transplant, but knowing those risks, it seemed to me that he should be higher on the list than a 1B. A 1A on the list are the ones who they are in the hospital being kept alive. 1B, all LVADs are at the top of the 1B list, but there is a middle section that's a 1AE, which means 1A with an exception. It means you're not quite sick enough to have to be hospitalized, but you're essentially considered a 1A. So using resources I had developed over the course of time by learning as much as I could and maintaining contact with various doctors that have become family friends of ours now. They developed a plan with Cedars to get Rod moved up on the list. To become a 1AE is not an easy process. The National UNOS, which is the National Organ Donor Association, has to approve it. And then Cedars, their heart team, which consists of, I don't even know how many people, they have to vote unanimously. So it's a high hurdle. And they opted to approach this one differently. They went to UNOS first and to see if UNOS approved it, because if they approved it, there would be no reason for Cedars to not vote unanimously. But there was a risk if they had gone to Cedars first that they might not vote unanimously, and then we'd never even get the opportunity with UNOS. So UNOS came back and approved it. And so then we had to wait until Friday, which was December 9th, for the Cedars team. That's when they meet for heart evaluations. They, of course, did what we were hoping. They voted unanimously. And so on December 9th, I got the call that Rod had been moved up to a 1AE. And 5 days later, we got the call from Cedars that they had organs for Rod, and to take our time. It was probably transplants would probably happen the next day. So we got the call at 4:30 in the afternoon, and that's the last time you want to leave Orange County to head to LA. Takes a day, takes forever. So thankfully, they said, wait till after traffic, just get here by 11, and we'll get them all checked in, all ready to go, and most likely the surgery will happen tomorrow. And it ended up actually occurring on one more day later, on December 16th instead.
Rod, what was your reaction? I know you'd been waiting for this for a long time to get that phone call, and then you finally got it, and this was going to happen.
Well, I received a call. We were driving back from San Diego, and Rhonda was driving, and I was just sitting over on the other side taking a nap. And then my phone rang, and I looked at it, and I saw the numbers. I says, "Here, honey, this might be your call." You know, that the call was okay for me to get ready to go to Cedars. And I went back to sleep and let her handle it because she was handling everything else, and it seemed to have been working out. So I figured, what the heck? I had a lot of luck in the batter's box. I don't know if I was going to have any luck with this. And she says, "Yeah, we've got to go up to Cedars." And then I said, "Geez, you know what time it is? The traffic and all this stuff." So I called this buddy of mine and I said, "Hey, you know, we might have to go to Cedars in heavy traffic." And he says, "Oh, let me call my buddy that's, he's a helicopter guy with the news, and maybe he can, you know, pick you up and take you up to Cedars. We wouldn't have to battle the traffic." And it worked out where everything, traffic and everything, you know, with her driving was good. So I didn't think much about it because I never thought about dying. I wasn't afraid to die, and you know, I had faith and I believed in my Holy Father. So I figured he'd step in and, you know, keep me here. After sending me back 3 times before, I don't think he's going to try for the 4th time. So I just kind of let my doctor-to-be handle the whole thing while I was sleeping. She was handling everything. And I'm going to tell you that if any one of you ever run into a problem like I did and need a caregiver, I hope you get one like my wife, because she was just attentive with everything, asked all kinds of questions. You know, she was there morning, noon, and night. I used to have to kick her out of the hospital so she could go home and get some rest. But she was just unbelievable through this whole thing. You know, it's just why I'm here today.
You are constantly in contact with fans, and I know you made quite an impact on the Reuland family a long, long time ago. Do you remember the incident, meeting Conrad?
I remember meeting him at the preschool.
Yeah.
And then after that, you know, he kind of disappeared out of our lives, and I never saw him after that.
You had the transplant, and Ralph and Mary, of course, you lost a son. When did you first start getting the vibe that maybe Conrad had donated organs to Mr. Carew?
Well, it was at Conrad's funeral, which was December 23rd. Actually, the vigil was the 22nd, and people were already starting to say, "Do you think it was Rod Carew? Do you think it was Rod Carew?" And then the next day at the funeral, more people came up and said, "Do you think Rod Carew?" And I looked at him, I said, "What are you guys even talking about? I don't know what you're talking about." And the roommate, the same gentleman that drove Conrad to the hospital that night, Conrad was living with him kind of between home and there. He said, "Mary, listen," and he laid out the whole timeline of events, and he said, "Listen, Rod got a new heart and a kidney from the same boy that was 29, a young man that was 29, in LA, and Conrad was in UCLA at this point. They transferred him to UCLA, and I actually felt like I was kicked or something. It was just like, I don't know how to describe the feeling other than he had to catch me, because I went into, you've got to be kidding, this just seems so, it's got to be." So the next day after the funeral, I went and I looked up Rod Carew on the internet, because I had no idea that this was going on. And when I read his story, I once again felt like I was like being hit by a lightning bolt. I don't know how to describe it, but I just went numb, and I went, oh my gosh, it's got to be. And one of the last things that we said when we left Conrad, and we didn't go back after the 12th, even though I know they were keeping him alive on life support, was we want to meet the people that gets his organs. And they told us that has to be a mutual thing, and it won't be, before a year. You usually have to wait a year. And I said, I don't care when it is. If they want to meet, we definitely want to meet them. So I kind of figured it had to be Rod Carew, and got Ralph involved. But I started hearing from so many people, and then I got a friend, Rhonda's number from a mutual friend, and probably the hardest call of my life. I called her and I said something to the fact of, hey, listen, my name's Mary Reuland, and I think your husband may have my son's heart and left kidney. Call me if you want to talk. And she called a couple of days later, and the rest is pretty much history. I called up the organ donation company, and because we had to be 100% sure. And I kind of stunned her when I said, listen, there's a lot of rumors. This is out there. It's like a runaway train. We need to control this. And I said, we need to know, did my son's heart and left kidney go to Rod Carew? And she was stunned. It felt like seconds that she didn't talk. I remember this call like it was yesterday. And finally she said, yes, it did, and I think it's magical. And I said, okay, and then we took off with it. Yeah, we got to meet, which was wonderful to us, because to know that a part of my son is still up here, it's wonderful.
And you got to hear your son's heart beat in Rod's chest. The point of all this, of course, is to increase awareness for donorism, to encourage people to consider what Conrad considered. And with that in mind, Rod, is there any doubt in your mind that without Conrad's generous attitude at the time when he had to renew his driver's license, is there any doubt in your mind that without that you would not be here?
Oh, definitely. It's, I thought about it and I said, man, I'm glad that I treated this kid nice, that I, made him feel good. But I wanted a young heart. I told the docs, if you guys can get me a young heart, maybe I can go out and get some base hits, sign another contract or something like that. And they said, well, we'll find you one that's strong. And
I told him he's got to go out and start. He's got to